Do you remember Hello Neighbor? It was a little-known horror indie game with advanced AI that learned from your decisions. It had deep storytelling, flawless gameplay, and amazing, incredible box stacking. I can't even say that with a straight face. It's Hello Neighbor. So, a little context for this video. Hi, my name is Dolly Dawson, and I'm making my own indie horror game, The Carlette Show, and I do a lot of research on what makes a good horror game. And if you're like me, you remember when Hello Neighbor came out, and I'd never really heard of the game, didn't know of the horrors inside of that case, and I saw it at GameStop for like $10, and was like, oh hey, that's that game people compare to Bendy. I'll buy it! I had gotten it on the Nintendo Switch after all the hype had died down, so I had a completely fresh, unbiased perspective. Oh, let's skip ahead.
Is there anything in the boot for me? Nothing. What the?
Alla orospu
Whoa, is this nighttime all the time?
It's bad. And everybody pretty much accepted this fact, but as of late there's been a lot of videos about Hello Neighbor, specifically just about how incredibly bad it is. And most of these videos are like, it's bad and ugly, and it glitches, and the creators kept changing the plots for the theorist. Most of these videos are just the negatives. Save for a few videos, nobody really ever talks about the positives. I'll be honest, there isn't much. But I've never seen anybody try to redesign the gameplay. From the visuals to the gameplay and maybe a semblance of the story. So I'll be going through what didn't work in the horror, the design, and the gameplay. What did, and what I would do. Because the best way to learn is to teach. This game being classified as a horror game at all is debatable, except for those boxes. Those strike fear into me anytime. For example, getting chased by the neighbor is supposed to make you panic, get all tense, and you have to quickly make decisions about where to go and how to get away fast. And this is how it happens.
I'm shaking in my custom baby seal leather boots.
The first thing being done wrong here is the music. This is just a sick bass line for a jazz improv show. Compare this to one of my favorite horror games, Bendy and the Ink Machine. Or one of the many chase sequences from Little Nightmares. They're both erratic and jumping around, making you become alert. They give a sense of tenseness. They add to the situation, while the Hello Neighbor music really doesn't do that. Let me play it again now. On a similar note relating to sound, I think the neighbor should have an audio cue telling you where he is. He should whistle while walking around the house like Death from Puss in Boots. That scene does horror better than most horror games do now. Can you imagine sneaking through the house and hearing this? It would be so cool, and it could change depending on if you knew you were in the house or not. It would be more cheerful and quicker if you didn't know, but if you did, it would become more slow and menacing like the death whistle. Other things relating to the horror is just the overall look of the game. Don't get me wrong, this Pixar stop-motion kind of style can totally work for horror games, but this is also unorganized and uniquely generic. It goes for an artistic direction then backs out of it, possibly from fear of being too weird. This was a little idea I had of redesigning it, but not changing it up too much to where it just completely missed the original vibe. Since the whole plot of the beta was getting into the basement, I wanted to make sure that the basement door was the main focal point. I wanted everything to kind of twist around it, so no matter which part of the room you were in, everything would point back to it. I also wanted there to be no light coming from the main living room area, so it had more of a real rich horror setting. I'll be honest, unless you're juxtaposing all this bright, colorful environment with something that's underlyingly creepy, it's just no good. I put the neighbor in the shadows there because I thought it would be cool if after you broke into his house a couple times, he'd get smarter and hide in the shadows and try and sneak up on you and catch you. And he might even be quietly sitting in a room you're in, and only if you make direct eye contact he'll try to rush you. So here's my interpretation of a slightly more creepy vibe. Then there's his jump scare. I'm gonna ask you, is this scary? This jump scare is so bad, I remember whenever somebody was watching me play and they said, "What is he doing?" The jump scare was so bad they didn't even register it was him catching me, much less it being scary. Simply cutting to black would have been scarier, but I also don't think a 10-second long cutscene would be good either, because considering how much you die in this game, that would be a real nuisance. Honestly, I think something like hit points would be good for this game, kind of like bending the ink machine, where if you get hit 3 times then you're dead, and it would give you a good chance against relatively impossible to escape scenarios. The caught animation could be something like in bending the ink machine when you get smacked in the back of the head by Sammy. There would be a camera shake, so even if he got you from behind, it would still be scary, and it would translate that you got caught. I know I'm using a lot of bending the ink machine comparisons, but if it works, it works. But of course, we could always go back to the funky bass line. So for design, I'm going to start off visual and then go more mechanic focused. So visually, I think the neighbor, or Mr. Peterson, is pretty okay. He gives me Buzz Lightyear vibes, and that kind of lessens the spooky value, but that's alright. The Argyle and the mustache are great. That definitely gives him that iconic poster boy value. Though I do wish they went with a more Year Without a Santa Claus and Nightmare Before Christmas look. Maybe even a bit of a Corpse Bride look. I can definitely tell that's the kind of look they were going for, but it definitely got lost in translation. Nicky is about the same. His eyes are pretty weird, but he, for the most part, has that very freaked out horror protagonist look. Same can't be said for his kid design though. That is literally just a very tiny adult man. So if I were to slightly tweak their designs, I would definitely lean into the Year Without a Santa Claus look, because the neighbor already has a kind of Santa Claus and heat miser vibe to him, and Nicky almost has a snow miser face. But I would also give him that kind of sunken in Victor from Corpse Bride look. I also made Nicky's outfit slightly more 80s inspired for a reason I'll talk about in a second. I definitely think that this fits the kind of horror vibe a lot better. Not to say that you can't have super cute characters in a horror game, but Hello Neighbor definitely needs a different visual identity, because it's not trying to be subliminally creepy or anything like that, it's trying to be very over the top, so therefore it needs to show it. Because, like, nothing about this makes me feel uneasy. This does, and this does, and this does, but not this. So then I put them against the background I made earlier to try and see if they would match, and so I came across this really cool color palette while messing around. So one of the main reasons I'm making this video is because I stumbled onto something I hadn't seen anybody talk about before, and that's about a 1980s movie called The Burbs. Ain't slick. I mean, just look at this trailer.
Morning, Walter! Spend a quiet week at home with Tom Hanks in The Burbs. It's a comedy about what happens to an ordinary neighborhood moves in.
Neighbors from hell. Your neighbors are murdering people.
The Burbs.
I think it's very easy to say they were very inspired by The Burbs, and I think it's super interesting. It makes me wonder why some of the other concepts from the movie weren't implemented. Like other neighbors. Imagine instead of just going into Mr. Peterson's house over and over again, if there were other neighbors you could talk to and they would tell you what they think the neighbor has in the basement, or what they saw him doing the other day, and how that could give you clues about how to solve certain puzzles in the house. You could say, oh, well then it would be too much like The Burbs, but that's basically the plot of Secret Neighbor in that one pilot. Maybe on certain nights, one of the neighbors could be up on his roof, and he could keep watch and alert you on your, little radio or something, telling you if Mr. Peterson is near. Have time to interact with other characters, and not just be throwing yourself into the neighbor's house. It's more fun, more interesting, and it's just better game design, because honestly, they just love designing a million different characters, then just never using them again. And here, they would be useful, and you get more use out of them. I mean, some of the characters in Hello Neighbor 2 and Secret Neighbor are in the books, and this is exactly what they were doing in the books. Yes, I know, I read the books. That was a long time ago. So, if we've learned anything from Hello Neighbor, it's to really focus on the gameplay of your game. Because, let's be honest, if you only focus on the story, I might as well be watching a movie. I mean, everything in this video is just little things that I thought up in about 2 days. And it's already a game I would much rather play. Even if your plot's predictable, if it's good, that's all that matters. Because 10 years later, when everybody tries to replay the game, all they're gonna see is how much of a broken, horrible mess it is. And unfortunately, some games have fallen into this trap like Security Breach. And as time goes on, nobody's gonna know the excuses that you made for why it doesn't work or why it's glitchy, because they're just gonna be playing the game. And if it doesn't stand the test of time, it's already gone. Hey everybody, thanks for sticking to the end of the video. I know this is something a little bit different than what I usually do, but I was thinking about it for a long time and decided to just make it. If you're new here, make sure to like and maybe subscribe, and also my Clementine keychain is still on my Etsy, so if you want to support the channel or if you want some of that cool new indie horror game merch, that's up there too.